Nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, if you would please call the roll. Actually, would you read the public announcement first?
Please be advised this meeting is being taped for video and audio broadcast. Assisted listening devices are available. Thank you. Mr. Bonifant,
Here.
Mr. Grisello,
Here.
Mr. Hempstead,
Here.
Mr. Kimmel,
Here.
Mr. Sechinelli,
Here.
Ms. Melendez,
Here.
Mr. Sarasis,
Present.
Ms. Bowman, here, Mr. Sims,
Present.
Mr. Kites,
Here.
Ms. Maggio,
Present.
Mr. De Palma,
Here.
Ms. O'Toole-Jandurko,
Here.
Mr. Igneri,
Here.
Mr. Livingston.
Here.
Wow, we have 15.
Thank you. We have a quorum, 15 present, I believe.
Yes.
First item on the agenda, acceptance of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 10th, 2016. Do I have a motion? So moved. Mr. Sims moves. Any corrections, deletions, additions? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Ms. Shannon O'Toole-Jandurko abstains. Next item on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes for the special meeting of May 2nd, 2016. Do I have a motion?
Aye.
Mr. Bonifant?
Yes.
Mr. Bonifant moves. Any corrections, deletions? Mr. Bonifant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't pick it out, but I will give Ms. Dixon the credit that on the minutes itself, it doesn't say special meeting. It says so on our agenda, but on the minutes part, it doesn't say special meeting.
On the May 2nd, it does not say special meeting, so note that as a correction. Any further corrections, deletions, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes as corrected by Mr. Bonifant? Aye. All right. Opposed? Abstentions? Was that an opposed, Ms. Maggio?
No, sorry, I just was.
Okay. Two abstentions, Mr. Hempstead and Ms. Gianderco. O'Toole-Jandurko. Public participation? If anybody is not signed up that wishes to address the council, please let us know and we will add your name to the list.
Good evening, Mike Mushak, 50 Elmwood Avenue. I want to speak tonight to two items on the agenda. One is the, are you timing me?
I see a lot of papers.
Not you.
Yes.
Anyway, I'll be short. In fact, I may teach you something tonight about goose droppings. But the one item I want to speak to, first item is about the goose control in Betts Park. And a lot of people don't realize, but geese are one of the major polluters of the Sound and the harbor. Their droppings are pure fertilizer. Every time it rains, a couple of tons worth of nitrogen and phosphorus flow into the harbor. And every summer we have fish die-offs and hypoxia, which is oxygen depletion from overnutrients, an abundance of nutrients. That leads to algae blooms. And when the bacteria decompose those, the oxygen goes away. Betts Park is a major source. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of geese that congregate there. They're slippery for kids. They're dangerous. Plus, they carry encephalitis, avian flu, Giardia, E. coli, Listeria, Cryptosporidium. All of these things are a health hazard. Every single goose creates 2 pounds of feces a day. I told you we were going to learn something. And we need to control the geese in Betts Park. It's a real serious health problem, a serious environmental problem. So they're going to have dogs go out and chase the geese. Believe it or not, that works. And it's environmentally friendly. We're not killing the geese like we do in New York City, but that would work. Second thing I'd like to speak to, really important, is the charter revision. I do think you should support wholeheartedly the Charter Revision Commission. I think they worked very hard. I know there were people that wanted more items on there, but I think you're limiting it with smart. We can address other issues, but I think that this council knows how hard they work. They certainly deserve a small increase, relatively speaking, in pay, and certainly the mayoral term of 2 to 4 years makes sense and puts us in line with most other major cities. We are growing. We should not be running ourselves like a small town from the last century. We are a different item now, and we need professional management, and we need professional counsel. Certainly the current council is very professional, but we need to offer an incentive for people to run, and that would be an increase in pay, and it's a mere drop in the bucket in the overall budget. So I think the Charter Revision committee did a great job, and I really do think that this should get the full support of the entire council. I think that covers Goose Poop and Charter Revision. It's the 2 things on my, not to be confused.
Thank you, Mr. Bushak.
It may be related.
I heard that.
Call the next person.
I heard that.
Mr. Ed Musante.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the Common Council. I will not be addressing you this evening on Goose Poop. But I would like to just take a couple of minutes, a few seconds actually, to thank the Attorney Fitzgerald and the members of the Charter Revision Commission. I see several of them are here this evening. In a very short period of time, they did great work, heard from a lot of people on a lot of different subjects, and I think came up with really a well thought out plan for charter revision, something that this city needs desperately, and I think that people should look at the charter every so often, every few years. I think this effort was terrific and very well done, professionally done, and lots of input from the public. Obviously, I'm here to represent the Greater Norwalk Chamber of Commerce with offices at 101 East Avenue. We represent 800 business members in the Greater Norwalk area. Most of them are in Norwalk. And I can tell you our board of directors last year, when put to a vote, we've been behind charter revision for many, many years, and last year we led an effort to revive the charter revision, particularly the 4-year term for mayor. I think we made some headway last year, as often happens in legislation. It takes a couple of years to get some movement, and so we were very pleased to hear that the mayor made this a big piece of his term, what he wanted to accomplish this year, and I think we're very pleased to see it happening very quickly and early in the mayor's term. So we had a vote on charter revision, particularly the 4-year term for mayor. It was unanimous with over 20 of our members of our at that meeting. So we very much support it. I want to add a couple of names of some people for the record that support this, and but were unable to make it this evening, but did sign a letter in favor of it. Pass that to the clerk. And I just want to say just a couple of the reasons why we think it's very important for this charter revision and why a 4-year term of mayor is important. The obvious answer is that a mayor gets elected, and we've heard this time and time again. It takes about a year to learn where everything is and how to get around City Hall and how to maneuver through the maze, and then the next year they're already running for re-election, and they really haven't had time to implement their vision. Well, 4 years certainly gives a chief elected official much more time to get their vision moving and to work on it without having to quote unquote play any politics in the interim. And I can tell you that communities, and you see the cities that have been very successful in terms of development, in terms of revitalization, oftentimes and more often than not, you'll see that there is a long-standing chief elected official that's there, that has been there to guide this and to get that done. And that is a significant reason. When I was with the city, and I would spend time each year going with the finance director and others to the bond rating agencies. I know the bond rating agencies would ask every year, are you ever going to move to a 4-year term? I mean, it was something the bond rating agencies like. They like stability. So we think that that's a very important item. And we hope that you will see fit to approve this this evening. Thank you very much, as always, for giving us the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Musante.
Ms. Terry-Poli?
Mayor, members of the Council, I'm Terry-Poli, Chairman of Greater Norwalk Chamber of Commerce and also a longtime resident, 29 years of Norwalk. I'm here to speak specifically to the charter revision related to the term of the mayor, changing it from 2 years to 4 years. I think in general, as a society, we're overly focused on the short term and need to take more of a longer view. And I believe a 4-year term will enable the mayor to execute on a longer-term strategy because he or she is not in permanent re-election mode. I believe it helps bond raters and investors because they will have confidence that the administration will be able to get done what they are trying to do and have an administration that's stable. That results in lower cost of capital as the city tries to access the bond markets. And finally, I just think it helps the citizens because they can elect a person whose vision they believe will have the time to play out in reality. So in summary, I would urge you to support the charter revision that would change the term of the mayor from 2 years to 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poli. There are no other people signed up to speak or to address the council. Is there anybody that wishes to do so at this time? Okay, then we will declare the public participation session closed. The next item on the agenda, comments of the mayor. First and foremost, I would like to welcome back and congratulate Councilwoman Shannon O'Toole-Giandirko, who is returning after having her first child. I'm sure that Joe is probably home doing baby duty.
Yes, he is.
Because normally he would be in the audience supporting you.
I haven't gotten any messages, so I think we're doing okay.
Are you constant? Yeah, I know. A new mom, you're probably constant.
I've got it here just in case he gets in trouble, but so far so good.
Now, in terms of the cell phone on the desk, we understand.
I get a pass, I hope.
We understand today.
To the rule.
Thank you.
Well, thank you and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Number two, been an exciting couple of weeks in Norwalk. If you've been following the news, just a couple of days ago, or maybe a week ago, we heard that GE is going to be bringing 500 jobs to the Norwalk buildings, offices, and we're really excited about that. And just today, or perhaps yesterday, Creus Energy has announced that they're moving from Stamford to Norwalk, and they are going to be bringing 200 jobs with another 225 planned over the next 4 years. So as we can see that Norwalk is continuing to grow, it's really an exciting time. It's good for everybody here. It's certainly good for our economy. It's good for our citizens because a lot of those jobs that they'll be putting in Norwalk will come, hopefully come from the Norwalk residents. So it's just, like I said, a very exciting time in Norwalk, and we're looking forward to continuing this wonderful growth that we're experiencing. Now, with the other thing, on Sunday, May 29th, Rowayton will hold its annual Memorial Day Parade. It's a nice event that they have every year. It starts about noontime. Marches from the Rowayton Community Center down to the Cannon. At the Cannon, they have a nice ceremony saluting all our the heroes, the military men and women who have given their lives in the line of duty. After that, everybody's invited over to the firehouse for the best hot dogs you could ever imagine, mainly because they're free. But other than that, it's a good day. On Monday, May 30th, our annual citywide Memorial Day Parade will be hosted by the Norwalk Veterans Memorial Committee. The parade starts at 10 a.m. at Veterans Park, ends at the Town Green on East Avenue. We have a lot of bands participating this year, to include the Marine Corps Band, and for the first time ever, the Norwalk Police Emerald Society, Norwalk Fire Department Pipe Band. They've combined and they've got a wonderful group together. Norwalk High School Marching Bears, Brian McMahon High School Marching Senators, bands from West Rocks, Ponus Ridge, Nathan Hale, side by side. If you haven't heard our bands, the city of Norwalk is so blessed. We have wonderful bands at the middle school level, and if you hear them play downstairs or at some of their concerts, you recognize why the Norwalk High School Band and the Brian McMahon High School Band are so amazing, because they bring them along right at the middle school level and bring them up into the high schools, and it's really great that Norwalk has such talent. There'll be scout troops and so forth. It's going to be a great parade. It's an opportunity to come out to salute the veterans that have made it home, to also honor and recognize the veterans that didn't. And it's also an opportunity to bring your children and kind of explain to them what the day is all about. Because if we start to forget all the sacrifices made by the military people, going back all the way from the Revolutionary War, we heard that the other day, right, Richard? From the Revolutionary War all the way up until the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq, people that put their lives on the line for our freedoms. If we don't recognize that, if we fail to remember it, it's only it's not good for our children and for our posterity. So please remember to bring your children out and enjoy the parade. And by all means, after that, enjoy your picnics and so forth, and go to play golf or have a good time, because that's what our military heroes fought for, and they would be happy if you were doing that. On Saturday, June 4th, Mayor's Energy and Environmental Task Force, thank you, Mr. Kites, will host a Norwalk Solar Challenge workshop from 10 a.m. to noon at the community room. And again, the first 200 residents to attend will get 5 free LED light bulbs. For more information, please check our website. And last but not least, it's our turn now to thank the Charter Revision Commission for your hard work and dedication to a very daunting task. I know you put a lot of time and energy into it. As Mr. Musanti mentioned, you got a lot of feedback from the community. The community has told you what they'd like to see, what they wouldn't like to see, and tonight we're going to be voting on whether or not we're going to give the citizens of our community the opportunity to decide this issue once and for all. So I appreciate the fact that you put such time and energy into it, and we have a certificate for each one of you that we would like to present with you at this time. So if you'll come forward, and let's give them a round of applause. First of all, we have the chairman of the Charter Revision Commission, Attorney William Fitzgerald. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Next, former council person and a good friend, Jerry Petrini. Next, a former city clerk and world-renowned athlete, Mary Roman. Thank you, Mary. Attorney Steve Keel. Thank you, Steve. Very much appreciated. Me too. And 3 that are not here.
Why not? Thank you.
Yvonne Rodriguez is home with bronchitis, so we wish her well, and we will have the certificate for her. Glenn Iannacone, a retired firefighter and former councilman, is recovering from a serious medical problem, so we wish him well as well, and we will make sure he gets his. and Michael Witherspoon, who was recently, who is also on the Charter Revision Commission, couldn't be here this evening. So again, my gratitude to the Charter Revision Commission for all the hard work and time and energy that you put into this. I know the pay is not very good for what you did, but again, that shows your dedication to the community, and I think as a council, we can give you a round of applause. Resignation and appointments? Not now? Council President, Mr. Kimmel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First item under General Council business, as everyone knows, is approve the report of the Charter Revision Commission. Before we get into the report itself, I just want to provide a little bit of background. First of all, thank you from the entire council to all the members of the Charter Revision Commission. They were paid a little bit worse than we are, okay? So we appreciate all your hard work. Also, from our law department, Diane Belts-Jacobson, Barbara Titia, and our corporation counsel, Mario Coppola, were invaluable. They really were at our service for all kinds of questions, some convoluted, some obscure, but we were really trying to do our best and figure out precisely what needs to be done, when to do it, and how to do it. So a special thanks to them. Also, whenever we needed anything done, vis-a-vis agendas or anything, Irene Dixon was always available in the city clerk's office, and she did an excellent job providing the backup we needed. Anything we asked for, we got. Now, as I've indicated in the past, the council decided in January to focus on issues that we inherited from the previous council. We knew there were a lot of issues out there, but we also knew that you can only have so many questions on the ballot for one election. So we wanted to deal with the issues that have been out there, that have been discussed for a while. We are not insensitive to some of the issues that came up during the charter revision process, specifically during the 4 public hearings, 2 held by the Charter Revision Commission, 2 held by the Common Council. We are very much concerned with our planning and zoning. We will look into that. There are questions raised regarding the police commission. There's been issues raised that make a lot of sense to me, at least, on the language of the charter itself. Now, what we plan to do, I think, we will begin to consider the possibility of another charter revision commission in the summer. Once things settle down a little bit, we have some time to breathe, we'll begin to discuss some of these other issues, and we'll decide how to proceed. But we heard what folks said. We are sensitive to their concerns, but we have to tread carefully, because often what is a charter issue and what is not a charter issue, what is legal, what is not legal under state law, is something we have to look into before we move forward. Now, the commission was interesting. 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans. And they issued a bipartisan report. It was supported unanimously. And I really appreciate that. It seemed to work. They worked hard, they worked smoothly, and they worked in a bipartisan manner. Essentially what we have before us, the first section of their report deals with 4 recommendations and 2 dates. First recommendation, as you know, is for a 4-year mayoral term. There's also a recommendation to remove the positions of sheriff, city treasurer, and selectman from our charter in order to allow local district-wide Board of Ed elections to be moved to the front page of our ballots during elections. There's a recommendation to make council salaries 2% of the mayor's salary. And there is a recommendation to make all references to council members in the charter gender neutral. There are the 4 questions that we will consider tonight. There are also 2 dates we have to be mindful of. One is that we plan to put these questions on the ballot in the very next election, 2016 election. That puts us well within the 15-month time frame window of opportunity provided under state law. Also, the Charter Revision Report calls for implementation of the recommendations should they be approved this November at the very next municipal election in 2017. Generally, that's standard procedure. You follow very next election after something is approved. So we have 4 recommendations in the form of questions and 2 dates that we have to be mindful of. Okay, now, what we have before us is essentially a 2-step process. The report of the Charter Revision Commission at this time, at this moment, is still a draft report. And we have to consider the draft report first. So what I would like to do is ask if there is someone ready to move that we adopt the draft report. Ms. Melendez.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the draft report of the Charter Revision Commission.
Okay, Ms. Melendez has moved that we adopt the draft report of the Charter Revision Commission. Now, at this point, under state law, we are only acting in an advisory capacity. We can make recommendations, since we're dealing with a draft. We can make recommendations to the Charter Revision Commission to consider our recommendations. Are there any recommendations from the floor? Mr. Hempstead.
I have a and I'll have a question too. I'd like a recommendation sent back to the commission, the terms of council members, reconsider and provide more in-depth information concerning the term, whether it should follow with the mayor or not. It was kind of left to, we kind of looked at it, we didn't think it was, we are concerned, as I am, that the voter turnout in the off years without a head of, what they would call a head of a ticket, will adversely affect the turnout for those collections, and I'd like the commission to take that item back up again with a little bit more research.
Okay, is there any comments on the recommendation? Okay, yes?
I too have the same concerns. I don't necessarily have a problem with a 4-year term for the mayor or the council, but I really think that they should be in sync, and I have concerns that as it stands now, the mayor would go to 4 years and council would remain at 2 years.
Would it be okay if we asked either Mr. Fitzgerald or Mr. Kehoe, who reported to us before, to explain your reasoning for keeping the council elections at 2 years?
So I'll take the first step.
Could you,
that
please,
we-
Mr. Fitzgerald, could you go over to the mic?
Sure. Do you want to join me? Do I have to sign in?
No.
No, we carefully considered having the mayoralty, you folks, and the Board of Education being up as often as possible. And we did an exhaustive review of the state of Connecticut to see if that was in effect in other cities and towns. And we had the assistance of the Corporation Council. But the greatest assistance we had in coming up with our proposal is Stuart Wells, who pointed out that in the off years when the mayor wouldn't be running, that the voter turnout is such that it wouldn't be a fair representation of the citizens of Norwalk as to who should be elected. And we tried to take various stabs at having everywhere from at large in off years and changing the Board of Education vote, and it just didn't seem to make sense to have a low voter turnout in those off years to change the structure of the years for the council. And we also believe that the citizens would, and based upon what we heard from the citizens, is that they felt that they would have more of control over the council by voting every 2 years.
Just to add a couple of things. One is that the pattern of having an executive serve 4 years and the legislative body serve for 2-year terms is a pattern that you see replicated at the state level and also to a large extent at the federal level. We thought that while the voters and while the voters might accept and the And it would be good public policy to extend the mayoral term, the executive branch, to a 4-year term, which is something that is often seen at the executive level. That having a term for the council that would be longer than the term for state legislators, longer than the term for Congress, members of Congress, would be something that was not a step that we were prepared to advise at this point. In addition, the question in having without a doubt, there would be some voter turnout drop-off. We would also note that there is also some voter turnout drop-off even in mayoral years. I mean, there are people who come out and vote just for mayor and then go home. Anybody who counts the votes of the council members and so on will see that. There are exceptions to that, of course, but if you were to move the council to a 4-year term, that would have implications in and of itself as far as the other races are concerned, because there are other races. You have races at the taxing district level. Okay, well, so the taxing district, you can have a low turnout there no matter what. But you also have Board of Education. You have Board of Education members running every 2 years. And so if you had the council running at the same time as the mayor, then you would have every 4 years you would have a Board of Education race that was taking place with what would probably be an even lower turnout, because then there wouldn't even be council members on the ballot. So while there are a lot of competing interests as far as that's concerned, we felt it was appropriate to take one step at a time, see how 4-year mayoral term works. If over time it is something that works well and is responsive, and people want to move this question to the council, that would be something that would be open to future councils, future charter revision commissions, and so on. But at this time, we felt that it was not something that we were prepared to propose at this time. Thank you.
If I may, did I see a hand there? If I may, I believe in your report you talked about there is provision in the charter for removal of a mayor for malfeasance, but there is no such provision for a council person, and so you could get stuck with somebody for 4 years.
That was something, I believe it was Mr. Anacone that brought that up during our discussion of precisely this question. I just want to add that there were, well, first, there is not a provision for the removal in the same way that there is as far as mayor is concerned. But there was, we did look at what the various configurations would look like. I mean, we had some very interesting comments that were made at the public hearing, such as, well, why don't you have the at-large serve for 4 years, and the council members serve, the district council members serve for 2 years. I can tell you that I spent a good amount of time and circulated to the members of the commission a chart, a rubric of the various different possibilities that you could have. 4-year at-large term, running the same year as the mayor, running in the non-mayoral year, the various different possibilities and configurations and so on. And one of the things that became very clear with that is that you could very easily, in trying to come up with a system that balanced off voter turnouts and so on, you could very, very easily come up with a system, in fact, it would be hard to avoid a system that got to be so complicated that you would run the risk of the voters not knowing who's running at any particular time. And we felt that complication is the enemy of voter turnout, and the simplicity is the friend of voter turnout. If you know who's running, if you understand your government and understand that council members run every 2 years, like members of Congress run every 2 years, like state representatives run every 2 years, like state senators run every 2 years, that's something that people will understand, be familiar with, be comfortable with, and will basically continue to vote on a regular basis.
Any more questions or comments on the recommendation? Yes?
Thank you. You said this is part one of, there's two parts to this. You have something else coming up, and I'm not sure exactly when I was going to make my comments.
Did you receive the memo was sent to you from the law department
Yeah.
on Saturday?
Okay.
And it was also in your box?
Yep.
Okay.
I just wasn't sure about so I'll just say it now. Thank you for putting a lot of thoughts and effort into the charter revision and going through the hearings and making your reports and all that. And you make good arguments, and you actually making arguments for both sides, and you're seeing both sides. I'll give you a lot of credit for that. I'm not particularly in favor of a 4-year term, and I have concerns about not tying it in with the council, because on the off years, you even admitted the voter apathy is a factor, but you made good arguments both ways, and I just want to say that the voter apathy is one thing, and I think that the stakes for running for council, especially on an off year, I got a feeling the fundraising would turn into because, let's put our egos in our pockets here for a second, and just how many people actually know who your council person is or anything like that. I mean, a lot of this is tied to the mayor's coattails, whatever side you're running on. And in order to get your name and recognition out there, yeah, it's great that you try to do good things, but also it's going to cost a lot more money, I think, to run for city council. So that's why I would like to see it tied to a council term with the mayor term. Thank you.
Okay.
If I could respond to that, and I really appreciate what you just said. We started out by trying to have a 4-year mayoralty, a 4-year council term, and the Board of Education. I mean, wouldn't that have been nice? Maybe we could have done that shortly, we could have gone home and what we wanted to do. But unfortunately, it didn't shake out like that, and in large part, and with the input of the Registrar of Voters, Stuart Wells, we were able to see the types of numbers that would come out in the so-called, off election year. And that was it. We spent a great deal of time. In fact, I think we probably spent more time on that than we did on a 4-year term for the mayoralty, which of course we did an exhaustive search with the state. So we didn't come to this lightly. And we had great input from the citizens. There were few, if any, that came to our hearings that were for a 4-year term for the council. Certainly for the mayor, that was the large sentiment from the citizens. But it was to keep it 2 years, and the Board of Education where it is, and certainly the Board of Education sent us a letter, which is part of the public record, about keeping it the way it is. And as you know, I had the honor of serving on that charter revision when that all came about. So, we really tried to have 4, 4, and 4 at the same time. It just didn't shake out. Then we went to having the at-large folks, a 4-year term, and then the district at 2. And it just didn't work. I don't know how Mary and Jerry feel about this. I know Steve's as the author of the report. So it's, again, we spent a great deal of time on this.
I know you did.
It would have been nice if we could have given you that neat package, but we couldn't.
Any other comments on the recommendation? Mr. Hempstead, would you please repeat your recommendation?
I have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold up. Mr. Sarasis.
I just wanted to say that thank you to the CRC for all the work you've done. I agree with almost 99.9% of everything you've brought to us and the reasons why. The problem I have is with the mathematics of our elections, which have steadily shown that we barely reach 30% registered voter turnout even for the mayor's election. I'd like to see 4, 4, and 4 because that's merely doubling down on the keep it simple, stupid system we have already of 2 years. But the math just doesn't, that's the one thing, the reasons why a 4-year term should be put into place, I agree with completely. The problem is the mathematics don't work for me. If you're a 300 hitter in baseball, you're okay, but if you're a 400 hitter, you're much better. And I don't know of anything that is success based on 30%. That's failure almost everywhere. And I'm just saying that if we had a higher voter turnout, I would be in agreement and 100%. And I know that's a variable that we can't control, but the numbers that we're faced with as far as our voter history here in Norwalk just don't jive as far as a number that I would be comfortable with in a 4-year term. Maybe after this presidential election, we'll see that more people are involved in the voting process, and then the next cycle it could be implemented. But at this point in time, it's not that I don't agree, and it's not that I don't think you guys, everybody did a wonderful job. And like I said, I'm in 100% agreement in the reasons why. Unfortunately, the math doesn't work for me. And I guess being a hockey goalie for over 50 years, the statistics mean something to me. And, success and failure rate compared to a number and a percentage also register in my head mathematically.
If I could say a couple of things to address to that, some of the other comments. One is that one of the interesting things that Mr. Wells pointed out to us is that voter turnout issues as far as local elections are concerned. One of the things that he noted in looking at the various different elections at the various different municipalities is that voter turnout has a tendency to be driven by particular circumstances of particular towns at particular times. You will have, and we've seen this in Norwalk. I mean, this is something. There was a period of time. Some of you who've been around longer might remember that I was crunching numbers for elections, long before I served as the election moderator, and then I served as the election moderator or assistant moderator for about 10 years. And one of the things we noted that you would have long periods of relatively low turnout, and then people would, because people were, relatively pleased with what was going on, relatively pleased with their representatives and so on. No, obviously, nobody's ever pleased 100% of the time. But then there would be particular elections where you would have particularly high turnout because there was a desire for a change as far as administration is concerned and so on. And so you have relatively long periods of time of relatively low turnout, punctuated by these high turnout years where more significant things happen. I think that is the type of thing that you're going to see whether you have a mayoral election or not. Another point that came out that I think was shared by a number of people on the commission is the question of accountability. Now, part of the criticism of the mayoral 4-year term, I mean, there are good arguments on each side of all these things. Part of the criticism of the mayoral 4-year term is that by lengthening the term, you're lessening accountability as far as the mayor is concerned. Well, that holds true to a certain extent as far as the council is concerned as well. But I think more significantly, as with so much else as far as our government is concerned, we live in a system of checks and balances. And one of the important roles that you as common council have is a check and balances as far as the executive, as far as the mayoral key is concerned. And if you go to a 4-year term as far as the city council is concerned, and so everybody, and you have the board of education and the council and the mayor all 4-year terms. What if something's going wrong? What if something's going wrong into the term? The voters don't have any opportunity to really say anything except every 4 years. By having council elections every 2 years, even if you have a mayoral term that's 4 years, the people of Norwalk have a voice every 2 years. And if you have a mayor who is not acting in a manner that's consonant with what the voters want of that mayor, the voters have the opportunity through electing their council members to put a check on that mayor. Also, I mean, not to mention the fact that they have an opportunity to express their wishes as far as the council itself is concerned every 2 years. But I think that it's important to see the interaction between the 2-year council term and the 4-year mayoral term as part of the overall dynamic of the functioning of the government, and actually see it in a positive way as being an opportunity for the electorate to not only speak as far as what's going on at the council is concerned, but also to speak as far as what's going on in City Hall overall, and elect council members who are going to help bring whatever adjustment or change that the voters deem necessary at that point. So.
Thank you. Okay, other comments on Mr. Hempstead's recommendation? Okay, Mr. Hempstead, would you like to repeat that for us?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to repeat your recommendation?
Sure, the recommendation was to send back the section, actually it would have been 2 sections, so they coincide, which would have been the term of the council members and the terms of the Board of Education.
Okay, so, Mr. Hempstead, yes?
Just to make a note procedurally, I think what needs to happen is there's a motion to accept the draft report. If that happens, then the draft report becomes the final report. So if you want to, if the motion fails, then it would, I assume, then you would be sending it back with the recommendations, correct?
Exactly, yes. Let me try to explain what Mr. Coppola just explained also, to make sure we understand that. If the recommendation is approved, if it receives at least 8 votes, that means that means the report will go back to the Charter Revision Commission. It will remain a draft report. There may be, we will entertain other recommendations tonight, which might go back, but the draft will remain a draft. If we to vote down, if the recommendation does not receive 8 votes, it doesn't pass, and I will ask if there are other recommendations. If we find ourselves in a situation where none of the recommendations have passed, there are no other recommendations on the table, then the report becomes final, and we will act on the final report. Is that clear? Are there any questions from Mr. Coppola or any
Well,
other?
if that's the case, then you have to withdraw the current motion and make a motion to propose sending the draft report back with the recommendation. If that, you understand, I mean, the motion right now is a motion to accept the draft report, in which case, essentially, you're describing, you're talking about the inverse, which is you
Right.
can vote the recommendation or the report. I think the better way to do it is you vote to accept the draft report. If you don't get 8 votes for that, then you're going to be sending it back with the recommendation. Now, or you could just withdraw that motion and make a motion to send it back with the recommendation. If that fails, then do a motion to accept the draft report. So,
If we make a motion to accept the draft report now, does that preclude the possibility of other recommendations being presented?
yes, because once you've accepted the draft report, it becomes a final report, it doesn't go back to the commission. So, I think you're in your discussion phase right now. So the question is, does anybody else have any other recommendations? You don't go one at a time, just a question. If you're going to, if you were to send it back, you're going to send back any recommendations you have. So
Okay.
I think the question asked now is, does anybody else have any other recommendations to discuss?
That's fair enough. Are there other recommendations made for the draft report? Ms. Maggio?
And this is not because I'm offended by Mr. Mishak's comment about higher quality council people, but I would like to make a recommendation to leave the council pay as is currently.
So you're making a recommendation to send it back so they reconsider their decision on council pay?
Correct. I believe that most of us are up here because we are doing it for the love of our city, not for the paycheck. And I would hate for somebody to do it for the wrong reason.
Are there any comments on that recommendation? Okay, 2 recommendations have been made. Are there any other recommendations? Just one second on that, just let me, could you, would like to briefly comment on the, yes, sure.
Each was not, again, that was a question we spent a great deal of time on, and we had the benefit of having two most recent former council members in the form of Jerry Trini and Glenn Iannico. And I learned something that what the compensation to the council members is after taxes, I think it's $47 and some cents, or $46 and some cents. And my response to that was, given I know the hard work and the amount of time that is put in by you folks, and the time that's taken away from your families, and the time that is and the money's out of pocket, that we had to find something that was more representative than $46 or $47 a month. And if we couldn't come to that, my recommendation was to have no compensation whatsoever, because I find it insulting that you're receiving $46 or $47 a month. So we came up with the 2% of the mayor's salary, and that was the reasoning behind it. It's either we do something that attempts to recognize what you're doing as well as what you're taking out of pocket, or there's nothing. It's I think to keep it where it is an insult. That's my opinion. And we had the support of two most recent former members. So that was our reasoning behind that.
Just really quickly, in terms of the question of the recommendation that go back to the Charter Revision Commission to just leave things as it is, whether you're in favor of the change as far as council salaries are concerned, whether you're in favor of leaving it as it is or the provision as put forward by the Charter Revision Commission, ultimately the vote, if the council ends up, the council could very well end up voting it down altogether. But if the council is votes in favor of the report, what the council is doing is voting to send that question on to the voters. It's not a matter where the council is voting to adopt it. It is a matter of sending the question on to the voters. It is a discrete question. It is not, that question would not be tied to any other question on the ballot. The way we put it forward in the report is that there were 4 questions, and the council pay is one of the questions. Ultimately, the voters would have the choice that you're recommending to the Charter Revision Commission, the choice of either making this change or leaving it the same. If the voters did not have a majority in favor of raising the council pay and pegging it to as 2% of the mayor's base salary, then it would remain the same. So I think that the question of the council pay in that framed that way is something that the voters basically would be able to, if the council deemed it fit to send it on to the voters, you would basically be putting that question not in the hands of the Charter Revision Commission at this point, but in the hands of the voters for the voters to decide.
Thank you. Excuse me. Any more comments on the second recommendation? Are there further recommendations? Okay, now, Ms. Maggio, if I understand this right, Ms. Maggio has a motion on the floor.
No, there's a motion on the floor to approve the draft report.
That's my point.
And so if the draft report gets approved, then it becomes the final report. If you do not vote to approve the draft report, then there should be a motion to send the draft report back with recommendations. And then as a group, you're going to discuss what those recommendations are and agree. So if you're going to make the report final, there's no sense in doing a motion now sending it back with the recommendations.
Right.
Because you'll have to determine what recommendations you want to send it back. So the vote right now that's before you, the motion before you is to accept the report.
Oh, did I say Ms. Maggio? I meant Ms. Melendez has a motion before. To do it.
Yeah, so
Oh, my mistake,
Yeah.
my mistake. My mistake,
yeah.
my mistake, sorry.
You were confused.
Thanks again. That's why he sits there. Ms. Melendez has a motion on the floor.
Before you do it.
I have a question to Corporation Counsel, through the chair.
Of course.
In your memo, and we discussed, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page and the clarity on this. This motion now is to accept the draft. The draft becomes the final document. The final document's going to get voted on tonight. Any motion, even though it's not listed as voted on the final document tonight, on the agenda, I'm also assuming by your interpretation of the state that if there's any motions to be done to try and separate so there's individual votes on those items, has to happen in the second turn of this and not this turn of it.
Well, the second,
What I mean, the final,
Once it
the
becomes-
accepted final draft,
yeah,
which
we had this
becomes the final
conversation.
report.
Yeah, so if this draft report becomes the final report,
Right.
then you have to approve the final report within 15 days. It just happens to be that because of the way the weeks fall, your next council meeting is not for more than 15 days. So unless you do a special meeting, you got to approve the final report tonight because of the 15-day rule. So let's see if we get to that point, and then I'd like to just go back over that question that you have, because the statute's not abundantly clear. It says you could either accept the report, reject it, or accept separate provisions thereof. And really the statute should be revised, quite frankly. I discussed this at a board meeting at the Connecticut Municipal Lawyers Association. Everybody was sort of confused by the statutory language, so it's something that I think CAMA may suggest that the legislature get clarified. But anyways, I think, let's see when we get to that point. I'd like to answer that question again.
If I may, so, just so I'm clear, because of opportunities, if there are any, that, is your ruling going to be that on the final report, that there is an opportunity to put forth motions to separate, yes or no?
I guess my answer to that is, as we had discussed, there's going to be a motion to approve once you get to the final report, there's going to be a motion to approve it. If it's approved, it's approved. If that gets rejected, then the council has a decision to make. Do you end the process there, or do you want to make a motion to accept separate provisions thereof the report? And somebody would make that motion, and then you would have a discussion to confirm which of the provisions, which of the questions you want to move forward to the ballot. The reason that you don't do that first is because then you're going to be taking four motions, in this case, because you have four questions, but there's some municipalities that may have 20. So you'd have 20 separate votes to get to the same place you could have in the beginning by just saying, because if you approve all 20, you could have saved a ton of time by just making a motion in the beginning to approve the report. Furthermore, the legislative intent here is really that the commission is is providing what the questions are, okay? That's why if there's a question, if the commission doesn't bring one of the questions forward, you can't add one. You could decide, if you don't want to accept the whole report, to only accept certain parts of it, but you can't go in and add other parts. You can't say, oh, and I want to, now we want to add something to the report. It doesn't work that way. You can make recommendations, but in that role, it's merely advisory. It's got to come from the commission. And so really the legislative intent is for you to vote up or down the report, if you look at the legislative history with regard to the statute. But there's a language in there that says separate provisions thereof, which I think creates the opportunity, if you reject a motion to approve the whole report, to then take a separate motion to approve just a separate part or provisions thereof.
Is your answer to the question?
Yes, I get it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me try this again. Ms. Melendez has a motion on the floor to approve the draft report. I'd like a roll call on that.
Mr. Bonifant?
No?
Mr. Versello?
Yes.
Mr. Hempstead?
No.
Mr. Kimmel?
Yes,
Mr. Sechinelli?
Yes.
Ms. Melendez?
Yes.
Mr. Sarasis?
Yes.
Ms. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Kaitis?
Yes.
Ms. Maggio?
No.
Mr. De Palma?
Yes.
Ms. O'Toole-Jean-Durco?
No?
Mr. Igneri?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 11 yes, 4 no.
Thank you. So the draft report, if I understand the state statute, is now final, a form of a final report, and we will begin the second part of the process. And I would like to ask if there is someone to move the final report as a whole, specifying the date that it will be on the ballot. Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. I would like to move that the council adopt the final report of the Charter Review Commission as a whole, and that the proposed charter amendments contained in the report be placed on the ballot for approval in November 2016.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston has made the motion to approve the final report. And any discussion of the motion? Mr. Hempstead.
Kimmel, I'd like to make a motion to separate those items so we can have individual votes on those particular items. So item A, B, C, and D could be separated, so we can have individual votes on each one of those items to move forward. I move to separate.
Okay,
I could-
Mr. Coppola.
My strong suggestion that you shouldn't make a motion to separate, or you shouldn't do separate votes with regard to the report. That either you make a motion to accept or reject the report, and then if that motion is, essentially, if it's rejected, then you have the option to then take a separate motion to approve separate provisions thereof the report. I do not recommend, as I've stated a few days earlier, to take separate motions with regard to the report.
Are you suggesting that procedurally the motion is out of order? Mr. Hempstead's motion is out of order.
No, I don't think the motion is out of order. I think the suggestion to do separate motions is wrong. I think it's improper to do it that way. Again, you happen to have 4 questions. What happens if you had 50? You wouldn't take 50 separate motions to get to the same place. For example, if you started with just one motion to approve the whole report. And quite frankly, I think to separate it out like that also conflicts with the legislative intent here, which is to either accept or reject the report of the Charter Revision Commission. And again, in my discussions with it, of the issue recently with the members of the Connecticut Municipal Attorneys Association, there was a lot of strong feelings about the legislative intent to either accept or reject the report. And there were basically mixed opinions as to whether you could even approve separate provisions thereof. Until I brought up the statute, everybody thought no, and then when they read it, they said, yeah, it is pretty clear that you could do that. But certainly the legislative intent is that the Charter Revision Commission is providing you with a report that you're going to accept or reject.
Based on my discussions with lawyers in your office, Corporation Counsel office, the legislative intent is that whatever finds its way onto the ballot is the product of the Charter Revision Commission and not the legislative body of the town.
Yeah, but with regard to the separate provisions thereof, part of that statute, you have the ability to, if you decide to reject the report, to then take a motion to just approve separate provisions thereof the report, but you can't add things to it. So you can only choose from the Chinese menu of options that they've given you.
Okay.
If I understood what you said earlier, Mr. Coppola, in the event we did not approve the draft report as a whole, we then could vote on whether we wanted to sever out some of those provisions. But because we approved it as a whole, it would be inappropriate now to discuss separating the provisions because the entire report was approved.
Well, I don't think it's because, no, but along the same lines, I guess with regard to the draft report, you decided to turn it into the final report. If you were to send it back to the Charter Revision Commission, I believe they have 30 days to send it back to you, and they could have decided whether to have accepted your recommendations or not. In that role, when you send it back to the Charter Revision Commission, you're giving them your advice, so it's an advisory role. They could say, we don't care what you think, or they could listen to your, that they at least have to hold a meeting to consider what you've suggested, but they don't have to accept it. With regard to the final report, the reason you do a motion to approve or reject the report is because, again, if you had, for example, 100 questions, you're not going to do 100 separate motions, approve 100 separate motions for how many hours, when you could have started with just a motion to approve the report. So you start with a motion to approve the report. If that gets rejected, then you have the option to proceed with a motion to accept separate provisions thereof the report.
Exactly, that's what I was saying, because we voted to approve the entire report. Discussions about separating the provisions at this juncture is not appropriate.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's not appropriate because it's impractical, and I think it's improper from a procedural
Yeah,
standpoint.
you just said from procedural.
But I also think it's very impractical.
I'll be back.
Okay, in light, yes?
I hear the word options being thrown out, though, but just as a basic answer, Mr. Hempstead can put forth that at this point in time. Inappropriate and saying that it's an option are two different things. So that's telling me is, he does have the option to separate it out before we take the vote. Is
First of all,
that
there's
inappropriate or not? Is that?
Well, no, there's a motion to approve the report. That has to be voted on. And I think your motion was to, could you repeat your motion?
My motion is to separate those items that we're seeking approval of.
Well, there's a motion right now to approve the report.
Right.
So I
And
think
I'm
you have
asking
to-
under, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm asking under our legislative rules, a motion to separate so we can vote on those individual questions that are part of this. I'm not hearing any, and.
Yeah, and the council
I'm not
could
hearing
vote on
anything that makes this illegal. I'm not hearing anything that jeopardizes the vote. I'm simply asking as a legislative body, which we have the right underneath our Mason's rules, to separate. I made a motion to separate those items we can vote on.
That has to be, and your motion to separate should be voted on by the council.
Right.
Yes.
And I just want to know if he has the right to do that.
Yeah, he
It's
does.
not, yeah, no problem. Mr. De Palma?
I mean, it seems pretty clear to me at this point that anyone that wants to separate it out would vote no to this first vote, and then we would go to Mr. Hempstead's thing. I mean, so we're kind of going around in circles here. So I think what Mr. Coppola is saying is, if there are, everybody knows now that if it gets voted down, there will be that breaking out item by item. But we have the ability to just vote on the whole thing at once, right?
But
So I don't know what the difference would, in all due respect, I don't know what the difference would be to vote for your amendment first, your motion first.
Vote on the amendment. Because we can make an argument.
If the vote on his amendment.
Okay, look, just let me, after I'm done. It's not clear, as Mr. Coppola said. It can be handled in different ways. So I have my concern is we had the option when we dealt with the draft report, and I don't think it's necessary. If you separate out, you're going to repeat what was just discussed over again. But as a legislative courtesy to Mr. Hempstead, I think I have no problems voting on his, I will call it amendment to the main motion to separate the items. It would require 8 votes. And if it is defeated, we have the main motion on the floor to deal with the vote up or down. Is that satisfactory to everyone? So Mr. Hempstead has an amendment, I'm going to call it an amendment, that's what we're used to, an amendment on the floor to separate the items and to deal with each of the 4 items in the report separately. Is there any further discussion on Mr. Hempstead's so-called amendment? Mr.
All I was trying to say was that I thought that his amendment would be taken to precedence first, and then what you were just going to deal with. And also, to point out to Mr. Coppola, is that there aren't 20 items, there's 4 items. That's all.
Okay. Okay, so Mr. Hempstead, as an amendment, Mr. Livingston has moved that we adopt the final report as a whole, with this specifying that it will go on the ballot this coming November 2016. Mr. Hempstead has offered an amendment to separate each item in the report, the 4 recommendations, and to discuss each one separately, which to me would require 4 debates on 4 different items, some of which would be long, some of which would be short, I don't know. But the amendment is on the floor. So right now, let's vote on the amendment, Mr. Hempstead's amendment, to separate the 4 items. Again, I would like a roll call vote.
Okay. Mr. Bonifant?
Yes?
Mr. Grisello?
No.
Mr. Hempstead?
Yes.
Mr. Kimmel?
No.
Mr. Sechinelli?
No.
Ms. Melendez?
No.
Mr. Sarasis?
Yes.
Ms. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Sims?
No.
Mr. Kides?
No.
Ms. Maggio?
Yes.
Mr. De Palma?
No.
Ms. O'Toole Jandurko?
Yes?
Mr. Igneri?
No.
Mr. Livingston?
No.
3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 no.
Okay. Motion is defeated. That brings us back to Mr. Livingston. Would you like to repeat your motion? Okay. Was there a hand up?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I know what the motion is, so was there discussion on the motion now?
Well, I'm just asking Mr. Livingston to repeat his motion.
Okay. I had moved that the council adopt the final report of the Charter Review Commission as a whole, and that the proposed charter amendments contained in the report be placed on the ballot for approval in November 2016.
Okay, discussion of the main motion. Mr. Hempstead?
Thank you. It's kind of a shame we couldn't have had a debate on the 4 different items that are before us, but so be it. Because there are 2 items in here I'm very much in favor of. Actually, one as I suggested, which was to clean up an archaic reference to everything being a councilman, not a council person, because our society that was created in 1913 when women did not have the right to vote, and they since earned the right to vote, and archaic language has been enforced all these years, even through other charter changes. The other one is the other offices being eliminated, the selectmen, as they're called, as functionality, as there is no functionality, but they still collect a paycheck for it. And the other offices, too, have either been diverse to other people's responsibilities. 2 items I have the most concern for, and that's why I'll be voting no against this, and I am inconsistent. This is no reflection, and I mean it sincerely and personally. All right? I have served underneath 5 mayors. I think 4 mayors have talked about this, all right, that I've served with, and I've been pretty consistent with reviews. In fact, somebody reminded me by digging up one of the articles from 25 years ago today, pointing out the fact that I opposed anything more than a 2-year term. And I kind of opposed, a 4-year term. I'm saying that the 2-year term, it's kind of like some of the language that was spoken tonight, and truly, guys, I know you all personally. Thank you for your service. Sometimes you just disagree about different things, and that's just the fact of life. That some of the arguments they made for accountability is why I believe that a 2-year term for mayor should remain a 2-year term. It's about accountability. It's about being able to correct a situation after 2 years. I can only recall 2 mayors in probably the last 40 years that only got 1 term. After that, everybody at least got 2, if not more. I think taking away the right from the public to correct a situation, as in the same argument for wanting to keep council people for 2 years and Board of Ed people, basically they get a change over 2 years even though they voted for a 4-year term, comes into play. So I do not support extending a 4-year term for the mayor. I think it's worked for our system. I think honestly it's kept our city pretty much on the straight and narrow compared to other cities that get longer terms. I think they have to be held more, a higher standard because they have to report more frequently to the public. And again, I want to make sure, and I'm looking over to my right, I want to make sure that people understand that there's nothing personal in this for me. It's the way I've always been on this particular subject. The second part of this is, I said before, and as I think Ms. Maggio pointed out so correctly, I'm not in it for the money. I think this has come up several times in the past where I think even 20 years ago, they were talking about just doubling down on the amount of the salary and it got rejected like 5-1. I think there's no mood in the public to pay anybody more politicians any more money. I wish that some games should have been just zeroed out because the $600 makes a lot of complications for the finance department. It has to issue checks as an expense and that. And I think there would have been better ways to spend money for support of the council itself as a whole with either some additional part-time staffing or people that can help us out versus trying to increase personal salaries. So I will be voting as a whole against this report based on those two items because I'm forced to vote not in part and parcel to each individual one, but vote as a whole. Thank you.
Further comments?
I just want to say,
Priscilla.
when we put together this Charter Revision Commission, I was very proud of this body, the way it was put together. It was done in a completely nonpartisan manner. I think I know that the minority party had disproportionate representation, and that was fine, and it's worked out fine because this Charter Revision Commission has done a great job. It became apparent when I read their report. It's become apparent at each public hearing and at the workshops that we've held. They were thorough, they were thoughtful, and very easy to understand. They had approached it from every angle, and I think it's time to let the voters decide on their recommendations. So I'm in favor of it.
Further comments? Ms. Bowman?
And I understand there will be further, hopefully another charter revision. What I am looking at is for the council to have 4-year terms. The Board of Education already has 4-year terms, even though they're on a stagnated election season. So if this were to pass, this would leave the council as the only body that is still at a 2-year term. Because we have the mayoral 4-year terms on this one, I am going to support it, but I'm hoping that we can revisit this and go back, because I was also under the impression that we were making changes to save the city money, and this way we're not saving the city money because we're still running an election every 2 years.
Thank you. Further? Ms. Maggio?
I completely agree with what Faye just said. I have been in favor of the mayor changing to a 4-year term, so it's not a constant election running cycle. However, like Faye said, saving money for the taxpayers by running one election and also making it, like Steve said, keep it simple, stupid. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah.
And believe in the
so
math.
So that the voters could just come out one time. And I will be supporting this. I do think that they did a great job working together, bipartisan. I do stand by my statement earlier about not increasing the pay, but I think now, like Mike said, it is time for the voters to make the final decision on the charter revision.
Further comments? If none, I'd like to... was there?
Two people with their hands.
No, I missed. I'm sorry.
Raise your hand high.
Excuse me.
And do a backflip.
Excuse me, Mr. Sims.
Doing that after a fight.
His tie is blinded me, man. I can't. It's the tie, not me. Mr. Sims.
Thank you. I too want to echo a lot of the sentiments or comments that's been made this evening, because the Charter Revision Commission, I do have to take my hat off to them. They did a phenomenal job in a bipartisan manner. Now, obviously, they had two former council members that were on there that served, and also, again, they stayed bipartisan. And I just want to say that it's not about the council pay. And but at the same time, council members, we have a great job to do in this city. We go to a lot of meetings throughout the city. We go to a lot of functions throughout the city. And even today, I get phone calls from constituents about everything under the tree here and under the moon. And I actually go out and I go and talk to these residents, and I actually go and try to help address some of the issues that they may have. And it's not free. The gas is expensive still. I mean, it's a lot less than what it was 4 or 5 years ago, but gas is still pretty expensive, and it costs you a lot of money to fill up your tanks and to drive around and do your job and your due diligence as a council member. So, I mean, to raise the council pay to 2% of the mayor's salary, I think it's a great gesture. It's not, where the council members are making a whole lot of money. But I think it's a great gesture and going in the right direction. The last time the council pay was increased was in 1931. So I think that we're going in the right direction to make sure that, council members do their job correctly. And I don't think this is an incentive to get council members or anyone that want to get involved with the election process. I don't think that's any indication that, someone's going to come here for, $2,000 a year or whatever it may be, right? So, to say that, it's council members are going to come, or folks are going to get involved in the election process because they're going to make $2,000 a year, I just think that's absurd. I think that, they made the right recommendation, and that's why I'm going to support it. Thank you.
Mr. Santinelli.
So I do want to speak on the salary as well, because I get that it appears self-serving. And truthfully, I agree with Ms. Maggio. I'd be happy to take a $0 salary if that's what it was summed up to be. I'd still be doing the same level of work. But there are quite a few prominent individuals in the community that do work, and we're taking away their livelihood if they wanted to run for council. And I think that's something to take into account. We're discounting people that the citizens may want up here by our side that will never be able to run. Just we're taking literally food out of their mouths. So having the adjustment may potentially bring some of the people that will directly represent the citizens out and run and potentially be up here with us.
Okay, further comments?
Yeah, real quick.
Mr. Cottis?
Everyone wants to get out of here. Yeah, to echo what Mr. Sechenly has said about council pay, I was same opinions of Mrs. Maggio. I wasn't in favor of it, but then actually speaking to Ms. Melendez and being a student and knowing that it's tough on her. And also, I often pay a babysitter to be here. And how about, and we always, I think diversity is important on the council and different financial, places in their lives. So perhaps a single parent can afford, would help. We're still only talking about under $200 a month, but that may be able to help pay a babysitter to be here. That's one of the reasons I support it. And as far as four-year mayor terms, it was obvious to me early in 2013 that for a mayor to come in at a two-year term and to initiate a plan and to see that plan to fruition was very difficult. And luckily, Mayor Rilling got reelected and he's able to continue his work. But in a two-year term, it's very difficult. So I also agree that a four-year term is the best thing for the city moving forward.
Further? Mr. Igneri?
I'm just going to say, I fully support the revision, and I thank the committee. They did a great job, and I think it's, as was said earlier, it's time to put it to the voters. One thing you can do, if you feel that you don't want the additional pay, give it to charity. Make a $200 gift every month to one of your favorite charities, and someone else on the council can use it to pay for gas if they want. It's your choice. But it's time to move this forward. Thank you.
Yes.
I too would just like to add, I know everyone's kind of said everything that you can say about council pay, and I felt the same way, Michelle. I was kind of, and I'm probably the one that makes the least on the council because I'm a student, but for me it was hard because when I first ran, I had no idea there was even the $46.17, It was more of, I want to do this because I've lived in Newark my whole life, and I want to live here, and I want to raise a family here, and I want to give back to the community, and that's how I know that we all feel. But, we live in Fairfield County, one of the most expensive areas to live in the country, and we're Norwalk, which means we have lower income areas and we have more affluent areas, and like everyone has said, it does take away. It takes your time, and even though you're giving the time willingly, and you don't want to call it a sacrifice, but it's time away from your families, time that you could be working, time that you could be doing a lot of different things. Just getting something, just even anything a little bit more than what we were getting, could really just help. It just adds to it. It really helps, and it's not like we're paying anyone to, not like being a council member would pay someone's rent, so. I think it makes sense, and I'd just like to agree with everyone and add that.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry to bother you.
No problem. No. I saw a finger pointing at me.
I thought you were going to put it to a vote. I just want to say.
No, I'm not.
And I heard everybody's personal stories. All my kids are grown and I live around the corner. This is not that hard for me, and it's not about the money. But I do understand that some people, it costs them money to do things on this council. And I understand it's time to put it to the voters. I'm going to vote no because I'm going to support Mr. Hempstead so he doesn't leave,
That's
to
the
leave
reason.
to leave my colleague hanging by himself.
What about your constituents? What about your constituents?
Well, I'm not in favor of a 4-year term, so that's how I'm dealing with the constituents. I'm going to vote no anyway. But I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
If I may, I just want to emphasize something. Let it go. If I may, the charter, the report of the commission regarding money uses the term, financially speaking, it's a losing proposition to be on the council. It ends up costing you money. And that's a dilemma for a council person who wants to do their due diligence, to go to extra meetings, requires extra babysitters, to stay in, to all the things we're asked to do sometimes costs a fair amount of money. And it's so low, we're excluding folks. I can't do this, I can't afford it, I'm busy. And I don't think we can continue to go that way. You know, we're a growing city, 88,000 folks, and serving can't be financially a losing proposition. It'll just exclude too many people. I just want to say on the 4-year term, I was impressed by the Charter Revision Commission report talked about the administrative function, the governmental function, and the political functions of a mayor. And this is not simple. When you begin to think about it, you walk into City Hall, you don't even know the people in many cases, let alone what they do and how the administration works. You have no idea what all of these agencies do, when the terms are up, things like that. Then you've got to start worrying about your next election, where you've barely gotten your feet wet. Sometimes because the elections are so frequent, often we see union negotiations get tangled up into elections, as we've seen in the past. I don't think that's that healthy. And I think if you are not locked into such a tight election and re-election cycle, maybe our future mayors it won't be so difficult to make very, very difficult decisions, okay? As soon as we passed the 2/3 mark or the 3/4 mark of a 2-year term, people are starting to think about elections, okay? And what they do and what they don't do may be colored by that electoral election that's on the horizon. So I think, you know, on the one hand, we talk ourselves until we're blue in the face about planning. Yet we don't want to provide 4 years for the person who oversees the whole thing. We want him to get caught up in this 2-year election cycle. Yet on the other hand, it's time for more long-term planning. So I think we really do need it. The city is it's really beginning to blossom, and a lot of things are going. And now is the right time to make the change, in my opinion. So I will support the motion made by Mr. Livingston, who I will ask to read it one final time.
Third time?
One final.
Excuse me, but when you read it, Charter Revision Commission, not review.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay, so I move that the council adopt the final report of the Charter Revision Commission as a whole, and that the proposed charter amendments contained in the report be placed on the ballot for approval in November 2016.
Okay. I'm assuming there are no more discussion. May we have a roll call?
Absolutely. Mr. Bonifant?
No?
Mr. Grisello?
Yes.
Mr. Hempstead?
No.
Mr. Kimmel?
Yes.
Mr. Sachinelli?
Yes.
Ms. Melendez?
Yes.
Mr. Sarasis?
Abstain.
Ms. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Kides?
Yes.
Ms. Maggio,
Yes.
Mr. De Palma,
Yes.
Ms. O'Toole Jandurko,
Yes.
Mr. Igneri,
Yes.
Mr. Livingston.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have 12 yes, 2 no, and 1 abstention.
Okay, thank you. So the final report passes. One more point? One more point. The final, just administrative point, the final wording of the questions is, the council is responsible for the final wording of the questions. I would like the minority leader, if you have the time, you can do it, okay? I'm assuming you can. And majority leader, Ms. O'Toole Giandarco and Mr. Kites, to work with Mr. Capolo on just looking at the final questions. I think they're very good as they are, but look at them. And then I would like them to come back to the council for us to yay or nay them. And then they off to the city clerk's office they go. I know there is a timeline, so many days before the election. So if this could be done before the end of June, I think, like I said, I wanted to get this whole thing done before school was out. So if that's possible, let's shoot for the second meeting in June where we finalize the wording on the questions. Okay? Fair enough?
Yes.
One last point.
Excuse me, with regard to the procedural
Yes.
issue, I would suggest that the two leaders just check with everybody in their caucuses over the next week, see if anybody has any suggestions, because when they come back to the council, just from a timing standpoint, it's good if there's already been an opportunity to see if anybody has any suggestions. You know.
Right, okay. And for anybody, the whole one thing, the questions themselves are fairly straightforward. There are recommended questions in the report. Yes, Mr. Corsello?
To Mr. Bullock, do we have the authority to amend the questions?
Yeah, yeah, you do. Again, here, it happens to be in this situation that the questions are pretty straightforward, but yes, they come from the, what is it? I think the language in there is the appointing authority, but yes.
Yes.
Okay. You would know, so, thank you.
One final point, thank you to the council. We've been discussing this since, well, for a couple of years, but seriously, since probably the middle of December. And this is something we don't often do. I think we did a good job. It was an interesting debate tonight. People spoke from their heart and what they really believed in, and hopefully this will move forward, and we'll see what happens in November, and we'll begin discussing some of those other issues, hopefully in the summer. Okay? So before we move on to our regular agenda, the consent calendar, I'd like to take a 5-minute recess. That's okay? Generally, you need to vote on a recess, but I'm going to assume it's okay with everybody. 5 minutes? Okay, thank you.
Let's go to the consent. No problem.
Okay.
Are we going in our caucus rooms or are we just breathing?
We got to decide on questions.
Oh.
I saw your
No.
Okay.
Now have the consent calendar.
So we can finish this up. Okay, next item of business is Mr. Sacchinelli will be reading the consent calendar. Wait.
Sorry. Did I miss Eloisa?
I did it last time.
You did? I thought I did it last time.
No, you did it the time before that. Someone owns a business and has a million kids.
Ms. Dixon will check the minutes now.
Ms. Sacchinelli is waiting, Mr. Sacchinelli is waiting.
Sorry.
Quiet.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel. All right, this is the consent calendar. A3, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to enter into an agreement with Geese Relief LLC for project number 3688, Canada Geese Control Management, Calf Pasture Beach, Veterans Park for 3-year term with the option of 2 one-year terms for a sum not to exceed $31,200. Account as listed. General Park Improvements Operating Budget. B1, accept and approve the report of the Claims Committee dated May 3rd, 2016. B2, for informational purposes only, narrative on tax collections dated April 14th, 2016. B3, for informational purposes only, monthly tax collectors report dated March 31st, 2015. B4, approve FY 2016/17 Parking Authority budget. B6, close out the following capital project Health Department security system replacement with an available balance of $6,400 account as listed. Consent to table.
Consent to table.
Consent to, can we change that to consent to refer back to committee?
You didn't read it that way, that's why.
I know.
Is that?
Consent to refer back to committee. A couple nights out will do them well.
Will we do the same for item 7?
Yes.
B7, resolution approve a special capital appropriation in the amount of $6,400 to fund HVAC repairs at the Health Department building account as listed. Consent to send back to committee. B8, resolution making appropriations for various public improvements aggregating $29,034,000 for the 2016-2017 capital budget and authorizing the issuance of $23,902,000 general obligation bonds of the city to meet certain appropriation in the 2016-2017 capital budget. B9, resolution with respect to authorization, issuance, and sale of up to $47,500,000 City of Norwalk general obligation refunding bond effective until December 31st, 2016. That's the consent calendar.
Okay, that's the consent calendar is read. Any changes, anything to remove from the consent calendar? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise their hand. Okay, calendar passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Sacchinelli. In 2 weeks, Mr. Sarasis, you will be reading the consent calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel.
Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel. Mr. Sims, item 7A1.
Yes. Okay.
Mr. Hempstead?
No.
Yes.
No, we're on one.
No, you don't.
Let me repeat.
7801.
Oh, great, I'm sorry, wrong.
Let
Like church, wrong view.
the record reflect that Mr. Bonifant has recused himself and has left the council chambers. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 7A1, authorize the Mayor Harry W. Rowland to enter an agreement with the Norwalk Seaport Association for the use of Veterans Park for the 2016 Oyster Festival to be held Saturday, September 10th, 2016, from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m., and Sunday, September 11th, 2016, from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m., set up to take place Sunday, August 28th, 2016, with tear down no later than noon on Wednesday, September 28th, 2016, and prices are listed. Estimated attendance, 20,000.
Mr. Sims has moved the item. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, so carried. Thank you. Mr. Hempstead, as you leave the council, maybe you'll have Mr. Bonifant return. Mr. Sims, item number 7A2, please note that Mr. Hempstead has recused himself and has left the council chambers.
Okay, item 7A2, authorize the Mayor Harry W. Rowland to enter an agreement with Stu Leonard's for the use of the Andrews Field parking lot for their employees' vehicles during the busy store dates listed below. 2016, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, November 22nd and 23rd, December 3rd, 4th, 10th, 11th, 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and the year 2017, April 14th, 15th, and May 13th, 14th, 27th, 28th, and 29th.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Sims has moved item 7A2. Any further discussion?
Is there any specificity with regard to the hours on those days? It says enter into agreement, and I don't know anything about terms of the agreement.
Business hours.
There's no...
It will be regular business hours, just regular business hours. So it will be probably from like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m.
No, Stu Leonard's is from 7 a.m.
Or is it from
We
7
have a,
7 a.m.?
would you come to the mic and identify yourself, please? Okay. Let's-
Hi, I'm Mike D'Antonio from Stu Leonard's. Good evening, everyone, Mr. Mayor. It is from 4:45 in the morning till 9 is when they get dropped off. So the cars will be there all day until roughly 6 p.m.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any, it's...
Through the chair, please.
We're voting on the terms of an agreement. I just don't know anything about the agreement. So now I know the hours, or have any of the other terms been discussed?
Well, can I address that?
Yes, Mr. Sims.
This is an ongoing agreement. They have done this for quite a number of years. Prior to 2005, it was actually, they have an agreement with the city where it was a barter agreement done in lieu of plants and brush. And since 2005, it was a recommendation for the student limits to actually pay $125 for each event when they're using the parking lot there.
So it's $125
It's
for each day?
$125 for each event, correct.
Each day.
Each day.
Each day.
correct.
Further discussion? Mr. Kimmel?
Was one of the reasons we had the barter system for a while, and 125 can be looked at as not very much, but it was one of the rationales for keeping it so reasonable that this Stu gives so much back to the community. So it's kind of like, it's still kind of like a barter, but there's some money involved, money exchanged.
Further discussion?
In
Mr.
addition,
Sarazis?
having been on the council back then in 2007 when they changed, and having spoken to Mike McKay, he made it clear that it was much easier to keep track of a figure amount rather than in-kind services. Therefore, it seemed equitable for both sides to go to a very fair and reasonable daily price for the exact reasons that they give back to the community, and it proposed a much easier accounting of what we were getting in lieu of the bartering.
Further discussion? Questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? As Mr. Hempstead returned. Next item, Mr. Kimmel, item 7B5.
Oh, okay. 5, approve the fiscal year 16-17 WPCA budget. I move that we approve the budget. We have it as part of our backup. If there are any questions, I believe Mr. Chiamonto is here and can answer them.
Okay, so Mr. Kimball's moved the item. Is there any discussion, questions? Mr. Hempstead?
I just wanted this taken off so I can put my 2 cents in, which I've done it several times on this. I am a firm believer that the charges for our sewer fees should be based on usage. I've always said there's an inequity compared to somebody that may have 10 people living in a house paying the same fee for sewer disposal as a elderly person living by themselves. The fee is a flat fee, not based on any kind of direct consumption, is based upon an average. And I can't understand why in this day and age, the amount of years I've talked about this, that we can't come up with sewer meters. Other towns have them. Other communities have them in Connecticut. And I would like to see at some point in their WPCA budget, a line item for starting installing these so people will pay their fair share based on what they consume and put out to the sewers. And also, it's a terrific way, as an improvement in communities like this, that you can help conserve. Because when people start having to pay for something directly and undersea with the outgoing, that they suddenly, you know what, I might be wasting letting the water run every time I want to shave. I don't do much of that, but I'm just saying that. So that's all. I wanted a chance to speak about this. The budget is a budget. I always think it's a good budget, but I'd like to see that item appear in there, and that's just why I want the opportunity to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel.
Yeah, for a number of years, Mr. Hempstead and I have agreed on this. This was discussed when we formed the WPCA, I don't know, about 15 years ago. And the reasons for not doing it are the same reasons we heard over a decade ago. And the costs and the attitudes of the water departments are one thing. On the other hand, there's a fairness issue, an equity issue, and a conservation issue. both of which are extremely important. And we haven't been able to make any headway on this, and it doesn't make any sense to me. We can create example after example after example where it's just not fair to people, and it does not encourage conservation, as Mr. Hempstead indicated. What I would like, and I'm not sure, WPCA is one thing, and our DPW committee is another agency. I would like to fully explore going forward. I'll vote for this budget, but next year I recommend that the council does not approve the WCA budget unless we are convinced it would be a detriment to the city to begin moving in the direction that Mr. Hempstead indicated. Okay? Really prove to us that it's just an unbearable burden on taxpayers if we were to go in that direction, or we shouldn't approve the budgets, because it's just not fair. And like I said, there's big conservation issues involved. So I will approve it this year, but Mr. Hempstead's right. It's like beating a dead horse, and nothing changes. So this is the last time I'm going to vote yay for this.
We have Mr. Chimento here. Mr. Chimento, as staff person for WPCA, we will start working on that immediately, because I too agree that more importantly, it does not treat people equally, which is something we always strive to do. But, and just as importantly, the conservation issue, I make sure I turn my water off when I shave, but sometimes it's not always done. But yeah, I think it's critically important that as a staff person and with Mr. Kolb and other people from the WPCA, we should be able to put that document together and really look at it. There's a significant, there's many reasons why we should do that. So, thank you. Further discussion, Mr. Sarasis? I'm sorry, Mr. Sarasis?
In the spirit of my running theme of believing in mathematics and also adding fairness to that equation, I have to agree with all three of you who have spoken before me, and I fully support the direction that has been recommended. We go forward on this.
Mr. Bonifant.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate all those arguments, and just wanted to throw in the factor of if you're going to put meters or base it on the your water bill, I kind of want to put a second meter on the outside of my house for when I water the lawn. I don't want to have to pay twice for watering my lawn if I'm not sending it down the sewer system. All right. And like Mr. Kimmel said, one of the arguments that discouraged going this way was the administrative cost to do this. If you think your bill's going down, it's not. It's just going to very few people would go down from the cost to administer the whole thing, where it's a simple flat fee. But I appreciate the conservation arguments. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Carries. Thank you. There are no item 8, no 9, item 10?
Did you have to say item 7? Okay.
Suspension of rules?
Okay. Yeah, I was looking here. Where is it?
I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules to add a health, welfare, and public safety item from our special meeting on last Thursday.
And would you read that motion?
Okay. The item is authorize the Norwalk Police Department to replace its current issued service handgun, the Sig Sauer P-229R.40 caliber semi-automatic pistol with the Glock 17 Generation 4 9mm semi-automatic pistol via trade-in, which entails 185 Glock 17 Generation 4 9mm semi-automatic handguns, 25 Glock 34 Generation 4 9mm semi-automatic handguns for the Emergency Services Unit Tactical Team, 10 Glock 17 ammunition training pistols and holster and magazine holder replacements for each officer for a sum not to exceed $22,000, and the accounts are noted. This item did pass committee, They would like to do this now because it'll allow for the maximum trade-in values for their weapon.
The first item we vote on is the agreement for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? So carries. And now we vote on the motion by Ms. Bowman, who stated that this is, you want to repeat?
Yes.
Want to repeat that motion? No.
But this item did pass committee. It just was too late to get on the regular agenda. They would like to do this now to allow for maximum trade-in values of their current weapons.
Mr. Bowman has moved it. Further discussion? Questions? All in favor? Opposed? So carries. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Any further suspension of the rules? Mr.
I'd like to
Mr. Igneri, you tried. Nice try. But we'll let you do it.
I would like to suspend the rules to add to the appointments Richard Baskin to the Pension Committee.
Mr. Igneri has moved to suspend the rules to add an appointment to the suspension committee. Discussion, Mr. Hempstead?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to support suspending the rules of this item. It was sent out late yesterday. We still don't have backup in front of us. Nothing was left in our caucus rooms. Our council rules clearly state that we ask for any kind of appointments to at least be presented to the council a couple weeks prior to. It has been the normal procedures to do so. I don't know what the urgency is. If this, that's why I asked a question today, whether or not this commission was short and make a quorum. It seems that they have 6 of their 7 members, according to my response was. They're just missing one individual, so I didn't understand the urgency of taking something up that normally has our rules say we're supposed to get properly vetted, let alone something before us. If I didn't read the email, I wouldn't even have known about it. So I won't be supporting suspension rules on this particular item.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Kimmel?
Mr. Igneri, could you explain the rationale for moving this forward quickly?
Yes, there are 6 people on the commission. There are supposed to be 7. They need a quorum of 4 to transact business. Looking forward, there are going to be other people not going to the meetings, so they were trying to get Mr. Baskin on so that in the June meeting, they will have the quorum necessary for official business.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, well, just a question.
Mr.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I've known Mr. Baskin for a number of years, and he's a smart, thoughtful guy who really cares about the community. But perhaps more importantly, he has broad experience in the securities industry, particularly in the area of risk management. And I think he'd be a really good addition to the pension board.
Mr. Hempstead?
That's what,
I was going, because we're actually voting on the motion to suspend the rules to allow that, so. Mr. Hempstead?
For clarity purposes, it has nothing to do with the resume that was sent around, nada. It has to do with procedures, the way we're supposed to do things, and it clearly, to me, even reinforces my belief why I'm not going to go forward with this, but the simple fact is there are 6 members they have, they just need to change the date of their meeting, which happens all the time.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend, to add Richard Bascom to the agenda for appointment to the pension board.
I won't be able to support it either, as I didn't see the email in time, and I don't doubt the qualifications of this individual at all. It's just that I saw the resume literally during the intermission, and I can't with good conscience go forward. I'm sorry.
I like it. Intermission.
Intermission.
That's cool.
Intermission. Well,
between Act 1 and Act 2?
It can be theater out here.
Any further discussion on the motion to add Richard Bascom to the agenda for appointment to the pension board? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? 4
Abstain.
4 opposed, 1 abstain. Okay. So 10 in favor, 4 opposed, 1 abstention. Okay, Mr. Igneri.
I will move to appoint Richard Baskin to the Pension Commission. I've known Rich for a while. He has a wonderful investment background. He's quite bright and quite level-headed. He would be quite an addition to this Pension Commission. In addition, he and his wife have worked very hard in giving back to the community over the last few years, and they've been hosting 2 events every year to benefit the Carver Foundation, and I think he wants to continue giving back by being on the Pension Commission.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm going to abstain.
1, 2, 4 abstentions, and 11 in favor.
Okay.
Ms. Maggio?
I'm sorry. I was just saying that
No.
motion to adjourn. And that.
And that.
Touch base.
Yeah, I mean-
Get together.
Yeah, we should, next week, I'm in town.